Hello students, in today's class we'll be talking about the different types of pollinating agents. Okay, so pollination, it can occur either through abiotic and biotic means. There can be an abiotic or there can be biotic source. Abiotic, we have to study wind and water, and biotic will come later, where we'll talk about how the pollination is happening through insects, birds or bats. So first we'll talk about the abiotic agents. We'll talk about the wind and water. Okay, so when the pollination of a flower is occurring through the wind, it is called as, through the wind when it is happening, it is called as anemophily. The examples are wheat, maize, coconut. Okay, so in these plants the pollination occurs through wind. Okay, it is called as anemophily. So now it is important to know what are the characteristics of the plant, the flower, where the pollination is occurring through wind. So the characteristic features. So here the flower is generally, the flower is small, it is dull. Dull means it is not that brightly colored. Reason being, here the pollination is occurring through the wind. He doesn't need to attract the wind. Okay, so it doesn't need to invest that much energy on putting a color to the petals. Here it doesn't need to attract any pollinators. Okay, it is happening through the wind. So the flowers here can be dull, they are small, there is no nectaries are involved, no nectar. Okay, so nectar is synthesized from nectaries. What is a nectar? So nectar is basically a sugary fluid which is made up of sucrose, glucose, fructose and so on. So basically nectar is a reward what a plant gives to a pollinator. So generally it is helpful for the biotic agents, because then they get a reward. So in one way the biotic agents, they are pollinating the flower, on the other hand the flower provides the nectar as a reward. So here nectars are not needed. Okay, next, here the pollens has to be produced in large number. It makes sense because it is happening through the wind, so a lot of pollens will be wasted. So therefore the pollens are always released in a large amount. Here the pollens are small, they are smooth, they are dry and they are lightweight. Okay, because the carrier here is the wind, so they are always dry, smooth and lightweight. Okay, now here the stigma has to be feathery or sticky. Reason being, so that it can, feathery, it will grasp the pollens, sticky, the pollens will stick to it. So in this, the stigma has to be feathery or sticky. Okay, so you understood, when the pollination of a flower is occurring through the wind, it is called as anemophily. The example is wheat, maize and coconut. The characteristic features of the flower here is, the flower is small, dull, it doesn't produce nectar. Okay, nectar is what? It is the sugary fluid which is consist of glucose, fructose, sucrose. So it is generally a reward which is provided by the flower to the pollinator, but here it is not needed, it is not synthesized by the flower. Second, here the pollens, they are synthesized in the large number, they are small, smooth, dry and lightweight, and here the stigma has to be feathery or sticky to bring about the process of pollination. Now next we'll move to the pollination via water. Okay. Next we'll talk about when the pollination of a flower is occurring via water. So that is called as hydrophily. So when the pollination of a flower is occurring through water, it is called as hydrophily. Hydrophily, it is of two types: epihydrophily and hypohydrophily. What is epihydrophily? Means when the pollination is occurring on the surface of the water, it is called as epihydrophily. So here the pollination occurs at the surface of water. Hypohydrophily is just the opposite. Means here the pollination takes place, pollination occurs inside water. Okay. So hypohydrophily is when the pollination takes place inside the water. For both the types, we will study different examples. For epihydrophily, we will study how the pollination occurs in Vallisneria, and for hypohydrophily, we will study how the pollination occurs in Zoostera. Okay. So this figure I have made for Vallisneria. So first we will focus on epihydrophily, means when the pollination occurs on the surface of the water. So what happens in Vallisneria? So in Vallisneria, the plant is submerged, okay, but the pollination is occurring on the surface of water. How that happens? So here this is the male plant. So here during the pollination process, the male flowers, these are the male flowers, these male flowers are detached from the plant. Okay, so these male flowers, they detach from the plant and they comes onto the surface of the water. This is the surface of the water. So they gets detached from the plant and they float on the surface of the water, where it reaches the female flower. So this is the female flower, this is the female plant. So the female plant is also submerged, but during the process of pollination, before that, this flower comes onto the surface because of the increased growth of the stalk. So here the stalk length increases and it pushes the flower, the female flower, onto the surface of water. So this male, it reaches to the surface of the flower, the pollens are released, it reaches to the female flower and it brings about the pollination. So once the pollination is done, the stalk length again reduces and the flower comes below, flower comes inside the water, and further development, that is the formation of seed, formation of fruit, seed, everything occurs inside water. Okay, let's revise once again. So epihydrophily is when the pollination is occurring inside on the surface of the water. The example is Vallisneria. So in Vallisneria, the male plant is submerged. During pollination, the male flower is gets detached from the plant, it floats on the surface of the water. There it reaches the female flower. So the female plant, the stalk length increases, and the female flower, it also floats onto the surface. So the pollen reaches the female flower and brings about the process of pollination. Once pollination is done, again the stalk length reduces and the flower comes down inside the water, and further formation of fruit, seed, everything happens inside the water. Okay. Now we'll talk about hypohydrophily. So hypohydrophily is when the pollination occurs inside the water. The example is Zostera. So what happened in Zostera? Both the male and female flowers are submerged. Okay, both the plants are inside the water. So here the characteristic feature is that in the male flower, the pollens are, they are long and they are ribbon like. Okay, so they are long, ribbon like, they are carried by the water currents, and then it reaches the female flower and brings about the process of pollination. Okay. So again I'll revise. In Zostera, male and female flowers both are submerged. The characteristic feature of the male flower is that here the pollens, they are long and ribbon like, they are carried by the water currents, they reaches the female flower and bring about the process of pollination. So everything is happening inside the water. So example of hypohydrophily. So I hope you have understood how the pollination of a flower occurs through water, hydrophily. Okay. In the next topic, we will be talking about the biotic agents, how the pollination occurs through insects, birds and bats. So I hope you like my video. So if you like it, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.